Good morning. My name is Daniel Cotto. I am talking to you from the United States, from Texas. I have to tell you that I am actually from Japanese descendants, but I was born and raised in Brazil. So unfortunately, I do not know Japanese, which is a shame. Today, this seminar, before I start, let me tell you that the seminar is a collaboration with the Gender Equality Office from the University of Yamanashi. And it's titled How to Prepare Impressive Research Presentations. Again, my name is Daniel Cotto. Disclaimer. We'll save the questions for the end, and you can type your questions on the question, the Q&A box here at the bottom. All right, so here's our agenda. So first, I'd like to start off by saying thank you for having me there, for having me virtually. I have to say that this is quite an extensive presentation, and it's very dense, but that doesn't mean you have to use everything that I'm going to talk about. This is just a guide. You get to choose what works for you. There is no one way to give successful presentations. You have to make sure that you feel what's comfortable for you and what works for you. Okay, but overall, this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about key elements of academic presentation, its technical aspects, common errors that people do while preparing a presentation, tips for designing your presentation, and strategy for delivering a presentation. Now, when you talk about the key elements of an academic presentation, you always have to think about context, right? Are you giving it in person, virtually, small audience? Is it a big audience? And we talk about audience, we need to know who are the people going to be there, right? What kind of information do they want? What do they already know? You as a speaker, of course, is a key element of any presentation. You have to make sure you're prepared, that you have done your homework, and then we move on to the presentation. Of course, you have to organize your presentation in a way that's easy to follow, that it gets the message through, and it really makes it useful for the people who are attending. And the method of delivery, of course, you can look at how you put together your slides. If you're not going to use a slide, some people don't even use slides. And that's also very key important of a presentation. So let's start with just the technical aspects of presentation, right? There are many technical aspects that are in place when you put together a presentation, right? So the first one I would say is know your audience, right? And just ask yourself some questions, right? How can I present the information in an attention-gripping manner? How can I make people interested in what I'm saying? By attending your talk, I'll assume that most people are somewhat interested in what you have to say. But it's always good to think about, how you're gonna make sure that you get their attention, you keep their attention, okay? What details should I present that build upon what the audience already knows? So it's always good to know what audience you're gonna talk to, because you want to introduce things that are useful for them. And depending on your audience as well, would they benefit from real life examples, anecdotes, illustrations, and visual aids? You think that a younger crowd would always like audiovisual aids better than older people. And of course, do they require some preparation? Do they need to review something before, during, or even after the presentation? So you can also break your presentation into 4 steps when we talk about tips about putting it together, right? Always identify what you want to say. There are certain things on your research, on your academic presentation that are more important than others. So you have to identify what those are, and make sure your talk revolves around them. You should create a defined outline so people know what you're going to talk about in what order. Then you start creating your visuals, right? 99% of people use PowerPoint slides, so be familiar with PowerPoint slides. If you want to put videos, you have to understand how to do that. If you want to print, give them out. That's also a good idea, so they can follow, take notes, and just make sure you rehearse. The good news is that you know your stuff better than anyone else, so that should come easy to you. But it's always good to rehearse. All right. First, really technical point that we should focus on, it's font selection, right? It's a small thing, but it's important. Always use a decent font size. I think the one here is 24, so don't make it too small. Capitalize only to make a point. Do not use complicated fonts. So these are very basic, easy things you can do to make your presentation better. Keep one font style throughout your presentation. That's also important. And you can use different size fonts to emphasize main points and secondary points only. And you can change color, size, and styles for high impact, but be cautious about that. So this is a good example of font selection. You can see on the left, it's very easy to read, as opposed to the right side, where the font that was chosen was really not viewer friendly, and it's really hard to understand what's going on there. Same thing goes with background and colors. Make sure you use a simple background that provides some visual interest. I mean, you can never go wrong with white. And just keep that same background. Don't keep changing because it's confusing. And of course, you can see that from that example, if you use a gray with the black letter, that doesn't work, right? Use the font colors that contrast and complement. So blue on white is always good. You can use red, but only, I would recommend that you use red only when you emphasize something, because red really signals danger. So do not use red extensively. And then check all the colors on projection screen before the actual presentation, just to make sure they work. So this is a virtual one, so everybody can see it's white and black. Again, here's a good example, right? When you use blue with the white or light gray, it works really well. If you start using yellows and gray with gray, then it just doesn't look good. It's hard to read. When it comes to images, of course, always use good quality images. One tip is that you always should look, when you Google search for images, you can find the DPI, the resolution, always pick high resolutions. Slide design, so it's up to you if you want to make your slides dynamic or not. Some people prefer, sometimes it's good because it drives people attention and focus on what you want to show. But I would say just be strategic, because you don't want to introduce more distractions that you already have, right? So a little animation like this will go a long way. You can see this is a DNA replication. I mean, it's very hard to describe what's going on, so the image really helps. The other thing that you could do when introducing images is you can draw attention to what you want to show in your slide, right? So right here, you see I have 3 sets of data, but I just focus on the third one, so you can kind of shade out these other 2 and draw people's attention to what you really want to show. And then this is, everybody should know that at this point, that your slide should not have too much text, right? That's not the goal of using PowerPoint. Do not use full paragraphs unless quoting. And quotes are actually a very good tactic come to send a message. I think quotes are very interesting. And make sure, you know, just create a slide for each main point that you have, right? So we already talked about focusing on main points. So just one slide per point to keep the audience concentrated on each point. And then it prevents people from reading ahead, because whatever you put on the slide, people will read it. And if you want to put full text on the slides, you put it and just leave it there and give people to read, okay? If that's not the case, which I do not recommend, just bullet points, not so, and do not go more than 6 to 8 points per slide. All right, so as a quality check, as far as slide designs, this is what you should look for, right? Your slide should always have minimal and necessary text only. The slide represents 1, 2, maybe 3 main ideas. Your images and graphs are easy to follow. Animations and transitions are relevant and not distracting, and your font is large and easy to read. And conversely, you know you're off the mark if you feel like your slides are too text heavy, right? And if you feel that the slides, they're all over the place, they're really talking about different things, there's nothing that unifies them. There are very minimal bullets and visual images included, because people really like images, people like minimal bullets. So if you don't have those, it's a little off the mark, right? Your animations are not distracting, and if your font's too small, that's a big no-no. As far as the content, right, you should always strive to present your research work in a compelling and cohesive way, right? Talk about examples, case studies, and in real world applications. The images and graphs tables are included, but only the ones that are relevant, and they have to be clear, right? Try to find connections with related research that has been done before, because in science, we're always building upon other people's knowledge, okay? So it's important that you make those connections. And of course, you need to convey why your work is important and what are the implications and applications, okay? And if you feel like your rationale is poorly presented, you're probably off the mark. I mean, if you cannot follow the rationale, then that means other people will not be able to follow, all right? Same thing with examples, right? Make sure you know your examples, that they apply, okay? Put graphs. Graphs are very helpful, like we talked before, okay? Those connections have to be there, and make sure your work is not presented in a vacuum, okay? Every work has to be connected with something else. All right, so this is another example of when there's too much text, right? So there are different things you can do here. One of is to break it down, right? So we know we talk about conflict of interest. So that's what we put in the top. And we know there's 3 types of conflicts of interest. So you can break them down, even put figures that represent the types. And you can stress the keywords with different colors, so you can see how this works much better. The other thing you can do is then you can do animation. But when you do animation, make sure that your animation does not look inconsistent like this, right? It just takes longer, it's distracting, it's not doing what it's supposed to do. If you decide to do animation, you know, just keep it simple, one at a time, so people can shift their focus from one to another, and it just follows a smooth transition. All right, so again, it's very important that the flow of your presentation is smooth, meaning there's a rationale, there is a story, there is an order that is followed. Have some stories, you know, some even quizzes or videos at various points, so people get engaged and they don't doze off. On a basic level, spelling, grammar checks have to be done, because nobody likes to read misspellings. Use clear language, especially if you're talking to a non-scientific audience. That's really important, because you end up alienating your audience. and just keep it simple, right? Short and simple sentences that can never go wrong. And if you feel like you're not doing any progress, just make sure that you stop, pick it up at a later point, with a fresh pair of eyes before you edit your presentation. And these are things that, everybody makes. These are errors that everybody tends to make in presentations. And again, I'm not saying these are absolute errors. It really works for some people, but for some people do not work. Things like too many slide transitions, sound effects, it might work for some, but for the most part, it doesn't work well. If you have pre-designed templates, sometimes you're trying to fit too much, or it doesn't fit. It doesn't look good, right? No text have slides, again, it never works well. And the elements too small, again, that's the same thing of putting too much stuff in there. Be cautious about that. It's better to add more slides than to cramp everything into one slides. And then, never think that nothing will go wrong, because technology is tricky. All right, so we talked about the technical aspects of a presentation. So now, what are some tips that I can give you to design a presentation, especially on a PowerPoint, right? Again, I have to start with knowing your audience. That's very interesting. That is very key, right? It really helps you define the amount of detail you have to give and what kind of technical terms and jargons you can use, right? Because you can lose an audience very quickly if they don't know what you're talking about. And again, talking about the flow of your presentation, it has to have a logical structure, right? Usually, you can think about it as almost like a grant application, or application for funds, right? You give a background, and then you talk what's important and why is important. And when you talk about your findings, right, people always want to know what you did, why you did it, and what you found out. And just prepare to use spoken English style, right? Short, like I said, shorter sentences, simple English, right? Don't be too formal, and do not use too much complex vocabulary, right? And then after you've written your script, just practice. Don't try to memorize everything. Just try to memorize important points, words, or phrases, because you can work around them. Because if you try to memorize everything and you lose your train of thought, then you're gonna lose your whole presentation, because that's what memorizing do to you, right? You can blank out. All right, so let's start with the title. So the title is pretty simple, right? It has to contain the title of your project or research, and then your name, your supervisors or PIs, name of department, and location of institution. And then from the title, you go to introduction. Again, it's always good to think about almost like a research grant application, but on a more light way, on a more simple, easy to understand way. So you start with the introduction with the background, and again, you explain why this research is important for them, right? You tell the audience what's in it for them. That's really important. And then, of course, you have to explain to everybody why is your research is important in terms of the impact, right? What will use your impact in the overall scheme of things on research, okay? And then you do a literature review, but again, keep it simple. Only the most relevant articles must be used. And you list the authors in a brief statement about what you learned from their work and how it helped get your research going. And like any application, it's good to state your research hypothesis so people know what you're trying to find. Okay, they help the audience relate to your scientific findings. All right, so from there you go into research methods. Again, pretty simple. We explain how you collect and analyze data. Again, I would suggest keep it simple. There are some methods that are complex, but people don't need to know about it, right? It's related to your field. If your audience knows it, they will know. You don't have to explain. But if they don't know it, sometimes just briefly explain what you did without going into the details. They don't need to know that. And then how do you go about presenting your data? Well, there's different ways you can present your data. You can just do a text presentation, and that's, it's good for qualitative and quantitative information. And you can break it down, the results into paragraphs or bullet points, so that works. A tabular presentation is more, it's more used to summarize in organizing relative complex quantitative data, right? When you put data, and you'll see an example of that later. And you can use graphical or diagrammatic presentations. So when you have complex relationships like patterns, trends, pathways, mechanisms, and quantitative variables, always good to draw graphs or diagrams. And it really helps connecting things and clarifying and explaining what you did. So, so here's an example how you can present your data, right? On the top right corner, you see a table with numbers. And on the top bottom right corner is the exact same data, but on a graph. And you can see how the graph works. In this case, the graph works much better than the tabular presentation, right? Because you can see exactly when, when and how the temperature changing in regards to time. So another points about the results is you should only talk about the outcomes that are relevant to your research questions, right? So you don't have to put any complementary results that are not really critical to your research questions. Okay. Always highlight the significance of the results. I'll have an example on the next slide about this. And always, when you put the results, always indicate whether they support, reject, or partially support hypotheses that you put forward. And add a statement about the study, and always display your data clearly and concisely. So this is a good example of a graph that display your data and findings, right? So it's always a good idea to let the data do the talking. So in this case, we have a graph, and on the top of the graph, there's already something there that tells you what it is that we're looking for, right? So we're looking at the inflation-adjusted income of typical California households, and it's telling you that it dropped between 2009 and 2010. So that's the key finding of this graph, right? But not only that, there's a subtitle that puts that result in context, right? So what does that mean? Well, that means that this drop actually has been the largest single-year decline on record. So in this graph already, you already show the results. You already told the audience what they should be looking at and why is that important and what's the impact and significance of those results. So that's actually a very good strategy. And then, of course, we have to move on to when you design your presentation that you should really avoid image manipulation, which is it's very becoming very common these days. But you have to fight the temptation to trick or mislead or manipulate data, right? So there are some examples of image manipulation that people will do. Truncate the y-axis, always start from the zero on the y-axis. Do not mess with scales. Do not use biased data. Do not omit any data. And we'll talk about images later, so which never manipulate photos. And that's important too. Do not use complex data charts to confuse the audience, right? Your goal is not to confuse, is to clarify data, right? Is to tell people what's important and be very concise about it. Right, so this is a couple examples of image manipulation. You can see on the left graph, the scale on the y-axis is really, really small. So that's why you see big difference. But if you look at the scale on the regular scale, you see that the interest rates are really not that different, okay? Same thing with this one. So in this case, the x-axis is actually shortened, but if you extend it, you see that the right graph is much more accurate of what the data represents, okay? When it comes to image on pictures, a lot of people have manipulated, of course, pictures with Photoshop, and these are just two examples. On the left one, you see a Western blot where a band was removed, right? And on the right hand, you can see a picture where images have been cropped, duplicated, and instead of showing different cells, they're actually the same cell, but cropped or duplicated. Okay, and that's a big no-no. All right, so after presenting your data, of course, you do your discussions and conclusions. Always provide the summary of your findings so people know what exactly you find important. And if you pose a question, then you have to have an answer, right? If you don't have an answer, just say what you know so far and what you plan to do next to answer your question. And then talk about future research, right? Again, use bullet points to say what you're going to do and how you're going to do it and why you think that this should be done and how that's going to help answer your questions. And finish with the acknowledgement, right? Always acknowledge people who helped you, collaborators, mentors, the organization, and funding agents, okay? Now, we talk about technical aspects, we talked about designing, and then the last part I'm going to talk about is how to deliver a presentation. And again, I always like to emphasize there is no right and wrong way. There is a way that works for you, and there's a way that doesn't work for you. So I'm just going to put a lot of things here, and you just try and see what works for you, okay? But there are some things that are universal that everybody should do it, and one of them is prepare, right? Just if you're going into a room, just make sure you go there before, the acoustics, the seating, and just familiarize yourself, right, with the location. You practice, if you have equipments, projectors, and stuff like that, just make sure you practice and see if it's working. And then again, your audience, just make sure that, I always ask when I'm asked to present who's going to be there, right? And then I can decide what kind of language I'm going to use and how much explanation is needed, really. Virtual presentations are really challenging. I don't like virtual presentations because I can't see people. I can't see their reactions. I don't know they're what they're catching on and what they're not, and this is very complicated. But some of the things you can do to overcome those challenges is really to calm yourself down, right? Just practice deep breathing. I think that helps me. Make sure you're looking at the camera. I once recorded a promo for the hospital I work in, and the person said I didn't look at the camera, so I had to redo it multiple times. Optimize lighting, background, and sound quality. Sometimes it's hard. Like for me, it's in almost 9 o'clock at night, so I can't be at work, so I have to be at home. So that compromise a little bit, but that's what I could do. Internet connection, of course, if you're doing virtual, and motivate yourself. I think for me, this is a very interesting topic. If you guys are interested, I have a TED Talk that I've given a few years back, and I think scientist communication is a very important topic for me. So I always like to give talks to anybody, bars, universities, whatever. I think it's really important that scientists start communicating better with their audience. You know, always make sure you prepare and organize. You know, sometimes it's hard, but rehearsing do make the flow better. You know, if you have time to rehearse, practice with somebody. Sometimes, you know, practice with somebody who doesn't know what you're talking about. That always helps, because then you know exactly what kind of terminology are useful, what kind of images and content it are user are viewer friendly. And then, you know, if you have a time limit, I would suggest time your presentation, right? It's rude if you have a 15-minute slot to go over 30 minutes. That's is not, that is disrespectful with the other speakers. And then how you can break it down, you can think about your presentation as the hourglass. You can break it down uh, as far as timing, you know, with your introductions, and then most of your presentation is going to be focused on what you did, what you got, and why is this important. And then you end up, of course, with, you know, with summary and future directions and the significance of your work. All right, again, talking about virtual presentations, you can use a background that enhances your professional image. Unfortunately, for this software, there is no such thing, but I know there are lots of virtual apps for presentation that allows you to change your background. So work with that, because you can put the logo of your institution, or you can put something that conveys a very professional image. Do not put uh, I don't like to see, you know, beaches, or, you know, pets. That's not really professional. If you're doing online, make sure you do a dry run, or at least check in 2 minutes before, make sure it's working. Some people like presentation mode. So if you have two different screens, you can actually do presentation mode in one screen and then the presentation another one. I found out a little distracting because everybody knows you're reading, and also you're not looking at the camera, but for some people it's helpful. I always practice the same technical configurations. You know, if you use a laptop, I always use the same laptop. And if you have a co-host, you know, make sure that he checks the chat, and if there's any glitches, see if he can help you. One of the things about presenting, of course, is you have to be conscious of how you look and feel. That's something that goes through your presentation, especially if you're talking in person, right? So always make sure you're rested, alert, wear something comfortable, but always look professional. Again, use techniques to, if you get nervous, right? There are some techniques to help you calm down, like deep breathing, laugh and smile. There's something called the power pose, where you can stand in front of the mirror, put your hands on your hips, and just get a very straight posture, and that also helps your confidence and keeps you calm. Always face the audience and make eye contact. So do not make eye contact with one single person. Of course, but make sure you make eye contact with different people in the audience, and you keep changing, so it feels like you're talking to somebody rather than just giving a presentation. And I feel like this really helps connect with the audience. Again, tall, relaxed, open posture, and just take natural pauses as you speak, right? And to calm down and improve the clarity. Everybody has a different cadence. Everybody has a different dynamic. So make sure you understand what yours is and what makes you feel more comfortable. Because at the end of the day, it's about feeling comfortable. It's about getting the message through in a confident way. All right. All right. And I'm just going to talk again how to deliver then effectively, right? So we talk about this. Let's sum up in the 4 parts. Start by telling your audience, right, why they should care about this, right? Why are you? What kind of solutions are you offering to what kind of problems? I think public speaking is a big problem, and I'm hoping I can help you with that. And or maybe you have a new technology or technique, right, that will help people. That's something that people want to hear, and that's something that will keep people engaged. Okay. convey excitement and what motivated you. I think it's very important that you are excited about your work, because if you're not, then nobody will be, right? And maybe you can talk about a story or a eureka moment that you had during your work that made you excited about your work. If you're an energetic person, I think you can bring that energy on. I don't like people who are too energetic. It's just too, they come up too strong. So you have to find your level of energy, okay? And then if you have time or if you have the technology, just you can prompt the group of questions and post. All right, and then start telling your story in an engaging manner, right? When you did your research, there was a problem that you're trying to find a solution for, and you did find things that were insightful, or hopefully, or something that fill gaps, or something that solved an inconsistency in the literature, okay? And even if you did, there are some things that you think your work could fill potentially in the future, okay? Always describe what you did concisely and logically, and build up on what you discovered. So you can say, that's where we start, that's what we did. So based on this, we did something else. That's always good to link those ideas, and just, have a strong take-home message, right? In this case, I like to say that for me, just find your most comfortable self, right, when you give presentations. Let's see, transitional phrases. This is a very interesting, so you can reinforce points and link them together, right? So you can remind the audience what they just heard and seen. You can say sentences like, now that you've seen what I've done, or now that you've seen the results of this experiment, as you know, people say this and this about this, and then you can tell your findings and what your contributions are, right? And then you can tell you're going to expand on previous information or move to a new one. And just, redisplay your outlines as well if you need it, to tell people where you are, okay, on your presentation. And lastly, talk to your audience, right? Like I said, always look your audience, look at different people at different times. It's always better if it feels like a conversation. It's okay to pause and refer to your note for reference if you need it, to repeat your point if you feel like your audience is not getting what you're saying. You always tell them what you're going to say, then say it. Summarize what you said. Have fun, be yourself, and model the energy we're going to create. If you have the technology, maybe you can do breakout rooms. I think people really enjoy talking to each other and generate some discussions, and then let the audience know how they can get in touch with you. All right, so the last question of the talk is always the Q&A, right? So the question is, how do I think more clearly and creatively when faced with questions? So I'd say the first thing is appreciate the conversation, right? If people have questions, that means they pay attention and they're thinking about what you said. So always appreciate that people have pay attention and they have questions. You can say, I appreciate you're asking these questions, thank you. That's a very good question. Make sure that you understood the question well. And if you don't, you can request clarification. You can say, could you repeat your question? Or is this what you mean? Or could you be more specific? Just make sure you understand. And then listen, right? I think when people ask questions, they want to know, everybody wants to know what the question is. So if you feel like people did not got the question, just repeat to everybody, okay? And if you don't know the answer, it's okay to say, I don't know, right? Everybody knows that. Some questions are difficult, but always make the effort to follow up, right? And find out that question. And if you know somebody in the audience, if you know there's somebody that might know the answer, you can actually volunteer the person to respond, but make sure you know that person and know that the person will not feel uncomfortable, okay? All right. And then when you're responding, I'll always begin with the polite comments, right? You can say, "What a thoughtful question! I'm so glad. Thank you for asking this." Um, and of course, you have to find the way that works for you and doesn't sound fake, right? This sounds like you. But there's some tips that should work for everybody, like being friendly and warm. Uh, it will make your question answer more relaxed. Take your time to understand and respond. Avoid rushing, avoiding dismissing the question. If you have to go back to the slide to answer the question, you can go back and do that. If you can anticipate questions, even better. You can add questions later and you say, "Oh yes, that's a great question. I actually have an answer right here." It will be very impressive if you do that. And have your contact information if they have further questions. And that's it for me. If you have questions, I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. Thank you. I wish you could see the audience. Let's see. You can see the audience. Hmm. Oh, I see questions here. Hold on. Is there a difficulty? Wait, no, that's not it. So the question is, do you ever edit the same presentation after the same time you present it? Based on Q&A from the first presentation, you edit info to your slide for the second. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. What I do as well is, I ask people that I know that were in the audience, what they thought about it. And the other question is, could you please explain and share more examples? Examples of what? Examples of what specifically? So explain the slides more. So you want me to explain the slides? Which slides? Was that too fast? Is there any part that you want me to go back to? Oh, hold on. Q&A tab. Okay, got it. Oh, I found the questions. Okay, good. All right. Yeah, so do you have any recommendations for font size or fonts used? No, I don't have. We do Arial, Calibri, but always 20 plus. 20 plus. Don't use don't use small fonts. That's for sure. You can use Times New Roman. Comic Sans was a font that people used a lot. I think you should not use that anymore. It's too overused. The Comic Sans, but you can use Arial. You can use Times New Roman. It's a good one. But fonts is really depends on how much information you have, but never go under 20, I would say. Maybe 24 is a good font. So another question is, do you have any tips regarding short time presentations? Yeah, short time, like 3 minutes is one slide. That's it, right? Maybe the title and one slide. It really depends if you're presenting data, I would say just one slide with data, one slide with the conclusions and summary. That's it. You can think of maybe 1 minute per slide. I would say that's about it. Because after 1 minute, people have read the entire slide, and I think you can move to another slide. Let's see what else. Can you please show me what qualifies to make a slide to have too many text? Sure. Let's see. So I would say this is borderline. This is borderline, right? And it also depends, right? Because this is conflict of interest. So it's not really important, but it's something you have to say, right? So people can read it, right? Sometimes it's not even the amount, it's what's in there, right? Because you can get whole paragraphs and turn into bullet points, and that would work. But you can put a whole paragraph there if you're quoting somebody, right? Let's say you have a quote for somebody that you think is really relevant. You can put the whole quote in there, and there's a whole paragraph here, and people can read it. But if it's important to what you're trying to say, I don't see a problem with that. It's just the best practice is bullet points because people can read easily, right? So how would you best resolve a technical questions? For example, slides having wrong context and misleading images. Well, you just have to be honest about it, right? You just have to say, look, I'm sorry, but there's wrong context in the slide. I just noticed now. It has misleading images. I mean, misleading to, I guess it's a complicated term, misleading. I mean, if you purposely put misleading images, that's just wrong. But if you just notice when you're presenting that was misleading, I think you can just be honest about it and just say, look, that is. And as far as glitches and about wrong content, I mean, that's what preparation's for, right? You shouldn't have glitches like this as far as wrong content or misleading images, right? Because you should have reviewed your presentation. In Japanese, there's a good phrase to use during Q&A. I will take this home and get back to you later. But what is a good way to say in English? Well, same thing, basically. You can say, I will sleep on it. Actually, there's a good saying there. I will sleep on it, or I will research this, or I will talk to somebody who knows about this and get back to you later. Yeah, that's a very good way to do it. It's unclear to include auto tests for participants to review after the presentation. I.e., if the slides will be shared or the presentation is recorded, or is it better to provide resources to more information afterwards? I guess it really depends. I think it really depends on the audience, right? If the person is really interested in knowing more about your presentation and what you had to say, he will usually come to you and ask for it. I don't think you have to provide too much information, because unless you're talking to very specific group of people, not everybody has the same interest as you on your topic, right? So it's very important to be respectful of other people's interests. If somebody's really interested in your work, he or she will usually approach you and ask you for more information. And the other thing you can do is you can just provide links at the end and share the slides, right? So if you find a link that's important, or if you have maybe a literature reference that you want to point out, then you can put at the end and say, look, I'm going to share the slides later. But I don't think it's, like I said, I don't think it's a good idea to put lots of text. People don't like it, right? Unless it's a quote from somebody that you want people to read. And if you put a big text, don't read it. Let people read it. You know, people know how to read. So if you're putting a big text, just let people read. I think that's important too. Regarding online or virtual presentations in the conference these days, usually presenting presenters will be moved to breakout room for a Q&A. At that time, what's your tip for the presenter when there is no question asked at the session to ice break the situation? Well, what I see in virtual presentations is if there is a talk, it's usually a panel, right? And on that panel, there's the chair of the panel. So if you are the channel of that panel, you have to come up with questions yourself. So when you are into these small sessions, you should have questions if no one else has questions. If you're just like me and by myself, and there are no questions in the Q&A, I would say, you know, there's no questions on the Q&A. I'm okay with that. I would actually probably review my presentation, because it seems like I'm not really conveying information that's relevant, right? Because if you're not sparking any questions, I guess I'm missing something. Thank you for the presentation. I remember all those tips from a class I took in university. There's one tip I learned, that the length of the presentation should not be short or too long compared to the given time. Say you're given an hour time, the presentation should be around 40-45 minutes, so you can have enough time for Q&A before the time ends. Do you think it's still true nowadays? I'm following this to this day. You know, what I think really is, what I've seen more and more is people are decreasing the time of presentations, right? So I get to see, and sometimes I get to do talks that are 30 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes. And I think that's good. I don't think people like to sit for a whole hour listening to somebody, right? I think as a rule of thumb, you think you're right. Maybe if you're allotted 1 hour, just give it 40 minutes and leave the rest for questions. That's what I usually do, because I don't think people like to sit for a whole hour listening to a presentation, unless it's something very useful for them. But even if it is, I would say you can probably say the useful part in 30 minutes or less, right? So I think the less, the better. And if you finish early, you have, like you said, have time for questions. And if you finish early, really, you give people 15 minutes of their life back, right? They can go on with their lives. They just got 15 minutes back. All right. I see a lot of people who give a presentation just by reading text on their slides. What do you think the value or benefit points of your presentations that are provided with information? Yeah, it's a good question. The text really is, it's like a guide for whoever is presenting, right? So you don't forget what you're trying to say. That's why bullet points are good, because it only gives you what you need to say, so you elaborate on that. And that's why I said, if you're gonna put a text on your slide that's big, let the audience read it, because they can read it faster than you can talk, right? So if you're not gonna do bullet points, and if you're gonna put text, let them read it. Otherwise, the bullet points are there to help you, to help guide your talk, right? And as you talk, you can elaborate on your bullet point. I think some of the slides I put are very wordy, and I could have just cut down, right, and just put keywords that will help me get to say what I needed to say. On a virtual presentation like this, I think it's better to put more words, because I can't really react to what you're telling me. And also, if I'm sharing a slide, sometimes it's better to put more words so you can share the slide. But I think giving a presentation is always better than written information. People much rather get the information from a presentation than written information. Because if you want to read information about your project, right, you can wait for the paper to come out, then you just read it. All right, let's see some more questions here. Yeah, that's why, I said on the slides that you need to come up with stories and anecdotes, right? Because that's what people like to hear. They like to hear stories, right? They like to hear a story that has a beginning, has a middle, it has, hopefully has a good ending, right? That's what people come for presentations. And that's what you need to work in a presentation to make it meaningful, to make it, there was a quest, there is something there that you're trying to pursue that you can't, unless you're a very skillful writer, it's hard to convey those stories in a written piece of information, right? It becomes a scientific paper. That's what it is. What's your thoughts on starting a presentation or fun, unprofessional introduction of the presenter? Yeah, that's interesting. So on my TED talk, I just said that I'm from Brazil, but I don't look like a Brazilian person. But I think it really depends on you rather than anyone else, than anything else, right? It depends on whether you can. It depends on your feel, I guess. Like I would say, never make fun of other people but yourself when you give presentations, right? It's okay to make fun of yourself, but don't make fun of other people. I think that's a good rule of thumb. But it depends on your audience too, right? If you're in a very professional environment, it can really backfire. So I would say if you make a joke, maybe make a joke about yourself, or I don't like, maybe leave your jokes to the end. I think it really depends on how you feel comfortable, right? Because if you start with unprofessional things and you don't feel comfortable with it, then the audience will not feel comfortable with it, right? So just be careful. Just be careful. Some people are funny, some people are not funny. Don't try to force it, right? Funny is it's a personal thing. If you're not funny, do not try to be funny. That's a good rule of thumb. Yeah, I'm thinking we'll share we'll share your PowerPoint. Yeah, I think that's what we'll do. We'll share the PowerPoint. after this. Yeah, it's very tricky. But like I said, I think you have to understand what works for you, right? There are some people who will be funny from start to finish, and you'll love it, and some people that will try to be funny and it will be very uncomfortable, very bad. So just know what works for you, right? Just and of course, the more you do, the more you know. But know what works for you. You know, it's let your personality go through the presentation, right? If you're a serious person, there's nothing wrong with your presentation being super serious. Just make sure that you make it engaging, and make sure that although it's serious, it's useful, right? I mean, you just have to make sure that people get something out of it. In the US, there's a saying, there's many ways to skin a cat, right? So, like I said, I gave you so much information. You go try it out, what works for you, right? It might be that very little works for you, but if one or two things work for you, I'm happy. I think these are all the questions. Let's see if there's any more questions here. Questions. All right. Any more questions? Let's see. Nope. I think that's it. All right. So again, if you're a first-time presenter, just know that it's very normal to be nervous, and people expect you to be nervous, right? Don't worry about it. Just make sure that you tell people what's in it for them, right? Even though you were a terrible presenter or your presentation is not good, at least you're going to give them something that's useful, right? At least you're going to give them something to think about it. All right, so let me just review let's just review what we talked about here before we leave. So we talked about, the key elements of an academic presentation, right? We talked about how context is important, knowing your audience is important. You have to be prepared. Your presentation has to be on point, and the way you deliver, the way you interact with the audience is super important. As far as the technical aspects of it, know your audience is number one, right? What is it that they want to get out of you, right? When you go to a conference, you know what you want to get, right? You want to get a new technique. You want to get ideas for your research. You want to get collaborations. So that's what you want to convey in your talk. Okay, everything else should help you get this out there. Okay, so create a story, right? Make sure people understand where you're coming from, why you're researching, what you're researching. Okay, real life examples, and etc. Organize your ideas, right? When you do research, you do a lot of things, but not all of them are critical, right? Just pick the ones that are really important. Okay, define the outline when you're going to talk about. Then start creating your PowerPoint slides. Okay, and of course, be prepared, rehearse. You know, like it was asked before, rehearse once, make changes, always make changes. You know, you can always get better. As far as the font, decent size font, I would say 24 plus, right? If you can do 25, 30, all the better. Don't make it too small. No capitalize, only if you make a point. You keep the font consistent, okay? And same thing with the background. Simple background, okay? There's nothing wrong with the white background. All right. Sorry, go back here. Questions, okay. There you go. All right. Good quality images. Again, a good tip is high resolution images is what you should get. Make sure you project on a large screen to make sure the resolution works for you. If you're going to use animations, be cautious. Do not use them too much or too distracting, right? You can focus things on your slide. Avoid text-heavy slides. Avoid at all costs, right? Avoid full paragraphs unless quoting, like I said. Some paragraphs, quotes are very important, so you have to put them, but let the audience read. Don't read it. They can read faster than you can say it. Okay. There are some quality checks on these slides that I will share that you can look at. That it's a useful guide for you guys. Again, this is an example of, even though you have text, at least they're separated in a way that makes it easier to understand. It makes it the flow better, right? So the problem here is not even the text, it's how you present your text, right? In a way that flows, that it conveys what's important, right? Again, PowerPoint is great, but it can be distracting. Make sure it works for you. Okay, and again, all helps with the flow, right? If you know your audience well, you have ideas of some hooks or some tips or something that will connect you to the audience, right? So if you're in the US, of course, you can talk about something specific about the US that you think is relative to your work. If you're giving presentations on a place you've never been before, of course, you can talk about the place you've met and how it ties to, you know, your back home, and it just makes you connect with the audience, right? That's a good tip. Make sure your spelling grammars are good, and so is the language. You know, a lot of people make the same mistakes. Again, they might be mistakes for some and not for others, but usually they are for people. Too many slides, transitions, right? Pre-designed templates are not good. They don't fit all of that you need. No text, too much text. Too small slides elements. Again, if you need to break it down in slides into two, that's better than put too much stuff in one slide. Okay. When you're designing, know your audience again. Have a logical structure on your findings. Okay, and be simple, right? Do, you know, small sentences are good. When you practice, you can practice on a very less presentations. Don't have to be formal. Formality is reserved for papers, books, right? Presentations are very informal. Okay, you want to connect with it like it's a conversation. I think the best way I can put it is, a presentation is a conversation, but you're the only one speaking. But when you see your audience and you see the reaction, you're actually having a conversation with them, right? And then it really helps you guide your presentation. And the simpler your presentation is, I think the more you connect with people, because people, when they sit you through your presentation, they don't want to have to work hard to understand what you're saying, right? They want to be informed. It's like watching TV. It's the least amount of effort possible. Okay, just keep that in mind. As you work through your slide title, there's a certain format that it's pretty universal. When you work through the body of your presentation, always, again, background, but relevant background, the impact of the research, just the most relevant articles should be mentioned, and always have a research hypothesis. Not always, but it's always good because people know exactly then what you're trying to accomplish, okay? Your research methods do not have to be detailed as much as you think. People just want to have an idea of what you did. And usually, when you go to presentations, people will have questions on your methodology, right? Because they will ask you, if they want to know more, they will ask you, okay, how did you do that? How did you do that? And you can address those questions later, okay? When you're presenting, you just want to give them an idea what you did. And then when you present your data, there are different ways you can present your data, right? You can do text, you can do tabular. Tabular means those tables, right? Or you can be diagrams, you can be graphs, you can be, and all of them work depending on what you want to try to convey, okay? This is just an example, again, that a graph here looks much better than a tabular result table, right? It really conveys what's going on over time with the temperature much better than a table would. So in this case, table is much better. Same thing with this graph, right? You can put the graph in here and you can tell them already what you want them to know. What is the graph telling you? And not only that, what is the significance of that finding on the graph on the table? And I found that this really helps people understand graphs. Do not manipulate image because people will know, people will find out, okay? Always be true to your data. I know that we had a coworker that did image manipulation within Photoshop, and he was let go of the laboratory. So these things never end up well. And there are many. All right. And then when we talk about discussions, of course, summarize and say what you're going to do next. Okay. Acknowledges are always important. And delivering presentations, again, find what works for you, but stay calm, have a plan, okay, and just feel good. Try to feel good how you feel and what you're about to talk about. Okay. Yeah. So somebody was telling me that they like to acknowledge first. Yeah, I've seen a lot of people are doing that these days. They acknowledge first. The thing that I find with the acknowledgements is that people don't really care about it, about the acknowledgement. I think in a sense, unless the person is in the room or I mean, it's up to you, I guess, what do you want to do, but it's not that people are really interested in your collaborations. It's just a way to acknowledge people who helped you, right? What other program can we use to make, apart from PowerPoint? I've seen people doing PDFs. I think PDF works fine too, but I think PowerPoint is just easy, right? It's just easy. And are there any recommended tools or software that we use to make presentations? Yeah, I don't use anything else but PowerPoint. I think, and our PowerPoint is always improving too. There are some things in PowerPoint that I didn't know, that you could do, but I don't know of any other software to make presentation. Now, yeah, apart from Adobe, I think Adobe have a presentation software, but I'm not familiar with it. Let's see. All right. All right. Any other questions? Yeah, another suggestion you can make on your last slide is, contact information, links of things that you want to share, and what else? Yeah, and then again, if you're presenting somewhere in a conference, right, and people are really interested in what you're saying, they will come up to you and get connected, right? So just basic information as far as contact, it's fine. Usually after talks, people who are really interested will come up to you and ask things. All right, any other questions? Let's see, any questions here? See, any questions on the chat here? All right, so if there's no other questions, we'll see how we can share these slides. I'm not sure because I'm only the presenter. Okay, here, another question here. What are the qualities of a good presenter? That's a good question. Huh? I think the qualities of a good presenter is, I think the most one is how comfortable he is with himself, right? Because you can be funny, you can be engaging, you can be serious, you can be pessimistic, but a good presenter never feels like he's trying too hard, right? You always feel like he's comfortable in his own skin, and I think that's the key, right? Is you have to find what works for you, right? You have to, maybe you discover a hidden talent, maybe you find out that you're funny and you didn't know, but I think a good presenter is somebody who can be himself and talk about anything in a simple and effective manner, right? Because I've seen many people who are very intelligent, but their presentation sucks. The presentation is horrible because they just don't know how to convey that information in a simple way, right? And I think that's very, very sad. So I have a question. The time allocated for a research presentation is lesser than 15 minutes and I have a lot of information to present and important things to share. How should I decide the time for each section? Should I focus more on the results and conclusion section, summarize the other sections? See, you think it's important, right? But that doesn't matter. What matters is who's listening to you will find it important, right? Because you say that you have a lot of information and important findings to share, but they're important to you. The question is, well, they're important for the people who are listening to you, right? That's instead of, let's say, okay, so let's say you're talking to grad students, right? I would say perhaps what's important for them is not really the findings, but how you went about doing your things. If you're talking to somebody that's reviewing your grant, then you should focus more really on what the significance of your study is, right? And the significance of your results, right? So it really depends on who you're talking to, right? As a rule of thumb, I would summarize the methods and just present key results, right? Because somebody who really knows your field of study, they will ask for supporting evidence later. They know what kind of supporting evidence is needed to come up to your conclusion, right? So if they know, then you should know too. And I would focus on the key, right? So it's like a paper, right? Supplementary information goes in the supplementary section, right? Doesn't not go on the paper. So you should know what is the key results that you should present, and really focus on significance, right? Really focus on impact. What is exactly that you accomplished there, right? All right, what are some good tips to making extremely clear and effective presentation slides? You know, there is no good presentation if your research is not good, right? If your results are not good, it doesn't matter how good your presentation is, it's not going to be good. I mean, you can have good data being bad presentation, but it's hard to have bad data being good presentation. That makes sense? Unless you have something good to work with, your presentation is not going to be good, right? So first of all, you have to have confidence that your research data is good and meaningful, and perhaps you can work that and make it feel important. But if your data is not good, then it doesn't matter. But tips on making extremely clear, well, like I said, we went through over these, right? Just um, just focus on what's important, right? Do not put 5 graphs in a slide. Nobody wants to see that. There's one key figure that is the key result that supports your hypothesis. That's the one you should use, right? If you want to be very clear, you can say, look, we made a bunch of experiments, and this is the one that really proves the point. This is the one that that supports my hypothesis, right? That's what you should do. That's what you should say. You can say you did a bunch of stuff, but only present the things that matter. And effective presentation slides are really presentations that convey what you want to say, you know, just clear, just not crowded, clean, right? And have useful information, right? Ask yourself when you're making slides, right? It's not about you. It's about the people you're presenting to. Would they find this useful, right? Would this find it useful for them to understand the story, right? You're not there to dump people with information. You're there to guide them through a story, right? You you guide them through a story that has a beginning, that has a middle and an end, right? But the beginnings being the backgrounds, your hypothesis, the middles being what you did to get there, and at the end, really what it means. What does it mean? Why do you care? Why should you care? That's what you should think about. Don't don't ever think that you should, you need to give them all the information. You just need to give them what they need to understand the story, right? What are the key factors? That's all. Wow, there's a bunch of questions here. All right, more questions. What are great ways to perfect one's presentation skills? How do I stop myself from pacing when I present? Well, there's only one way is to do it. You know what you could do? Just present on the mirror, right, to yourself. That's a good one. Present to people in your family or your friends, and just practice. There's no other way. You just have to practice, um, and practice to yourself in the mirror. Practice in to people you don't know. Go watch YouTube videos on presentations. I mean, you see how people present. Maybe you can find somebody who you think you can identify with and say, this person maybe has my sense of humor, and see how he takes advantage of that, right? Or you say this person is really shy, but he can come up with a good presentation, and ask people their honest feedback. You can present to them and say, look, what do you think? And just practice. I don't think anybody was born with the gift of presenting. How can we overcome difficulties in making a slide presentation? Um, how can we make a slide? Well, just think about how much time you want to spend, and maybe 1 minute per slide, and then you can kind of have an idea how many slides you need. And if you follow the tips I guess we gave you, right, have a structure on your slides, beginning, middle, and end. I think that will help. Let's see. Is there any recommended number slide count for each section of the presentation? Right, there is none, but I said there's an hourglass structure you can use, right? 10-15% of the introduction, about 60%, 60-70% of the meat. That means methodology, results, significance, and then 10-15% of the conclusions, summary conclusions, and future directions. I would say maybe 1 minute per slide is too much for you if you talk too fast, right? Maybe 30 seconds, but again, it depends on your cadence, depends on how you feel comfortable. If you need more words there to make a reminder stuff, maybe you need more time. So what difficulties did you encounter in making the slide presentation? How did you overcome them? I don't know. I think the greatest difficulty is to find time to make presentations, but also the good thing about presentations is if you give yourself enough time and revisit your presentation every day for a few days, you can always make it better, right? Because I think the difficulty is if you will have to put together a presentation in one day for the next day. But if you have one in advance, you can just revisit it every day for a little bit and just make them better. I think that that also helps. See, how do you prepare yourself for presentation? Me, I don't do anything. I just prepare. I just go over the slides. I mean, how else would you prepare? Actually, no, I take it back. So there's a technique I told you when you present it to your audience, right? And you're gonna stand in front of people, where you put your hands besides. It's silly, but it works. You put your hands in your waist here, and you stand straight, look in the mirror, and you make this pose for. I don't think you have to look in the mirror. But you just stand there for a minute or so, and it gives you confidence to go and talk, right? Because one thing that, not for this presentation in particular, but when I talk about research, nobody knows my research better than I do, because I'm the one who did it, right? Perhaps people know more about the field, more about, the impact on everything, but the way I conducted, the way I did it, I know more than anyone else. So, just feel confident on what you're saying, right? Just feel confident that you know what you're talking about. And if you don't know what you're talking about, prepare. Anticipate questions, right? Think about who's going to be in the audience and what they know that you should know as well, right? And what are the best things to do and avoid during giving a presentation? I think the best things to do is to look at people, which is horrible that we can't do this, and I wish I was there. But you will notice in the crowd, there's always the same type, not the same, but there's some types of people that are always there, right? The people who are nodding along with you, right? The people who are like, they don't know, they're like suffering for you because you're there, and they are afraid of talking public, and they know that you're like nervous. There are people who are not paying attention, right? And there are people who want you to engage with them, they're looking for you. So I would spend maybe 3-5 seconds looking at somebody talking like you're having a conversation, then move on to another person, and then talk to that person too, right? And just keep doing that. And I think it feels a lot more personal, and you get, some feedback as well, what you're doing well, what you're not doing well. And I would say what you should avoid during a presentation. Because there's so many things you should avoid during a presentation. I think not reading too much, right? Because I think it's insulting that you put something that you read and people know how to read, right? And people read, like I said, people read faster than you can talk. So avoid reading too much. And, if you're going to read it, just expand on what you said, right? Because if you're just going to read what's out there, then like the person in the question said, just send out a handout. So those are there for you to help you get somewhere, right? So you should avoid that. And you should avoid also turning your back to the audience. I think you should do that either. I've seen that it looks bad. Don't be condescending to the audience. And if you're nervous, don't try to hide it, right? Just accept that you're nervous. People are kind, right? They will know that you're nervous, and they will understand that you're nervous, and they'll give you a break, right? They'll be compassionate about you, right? I think that's the thing, and it goes back to being yourself. Find out what works for you. One of my favorite TED Talks is a guy who talks about education. He has a bad leg, and he makes fun of himself, and instead of feeling sorry for himself, he's has a very humorous look in his life. I mean, that's the kind of things that make people like you, right? I'm not saying they have to like you, but at least they have to sympathize with you, right? Which is hard when you can't see the people, but You should try. All right. And I guess this concludes our seminar. I appreciate everyone's question and everyone's attendance to the seminar. I hope you guys get to practice your presentations a lot, because that's really the only way to get better. You know, feel comfortable in your own skin. Find what works for you, and just present, and just grab every opportunity to present that you can. Never say no to presentations, because they will make you better. Thank you.